Hello, my most amazing artist. Today is clay day. Now, when you get this clay, it's going to be a little different than any clay you probably worked with before. It's not the same as Play-Doh, it's not the same as modeling clay and things that you can do at home. This clay is very special because it comes from the earth. It's actually called earthenware when it's still wet like this. So if you were to dig a hole really deep down, you might hit some clay. That's why it looks a little bit brown, because it's basically dirt. But clay, we are lucky because we have a kiln that we can fire this clay in to make it into something called ceramics, which might be what you drink out of in a mug or a cup, or maybe even eat off a ceramic plate. So today we're going to be making some ceramic planters. And we're going to start by making a pinch pot, which is one of the most basic forms you can make with clay. So when you get your clay today, it's going to be in a slab. A slab of clay is a cut that's kind of like a piece of paper but thicker. So with your slab of clay, you have to do something called wedging the clay. So everybody will have a clay bin. It's got some clay tools. It has a spray bottle, which is not a toy. It's a tool. If I see anybody spraying anybody at your table, then you're going to get that spray bottle taken away, and for some of us that's going to be really necessary to use at the end of the project. So please don't get this taken away from your table team. All right, but you do not need it at first because your clay is nice and wet and ready to work with. So wedging the clay is when you get all of the air bubbles out. It's important to get all the air bubbles out of the clay because if there's any air bubbles trapped inside there when it gets heated in that kiln, remember it gets up to 2,000 degrees, all of those little air particles are going to be trying to find a way to escape. So if you get a bubble in there and they start heating up inside the clay and they start heating up and moving faster and faster, what's going to happen when it gets heated in the kiln is your clay piece is going to explode. And we do not want any explosions to happen. So please be careful and make sure you're really wedging the clay. So wedging the clay is moving it back and forth from both your hands, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm actually going to ask that when you get your clay and get it into a ball, that you take a pinch off, about that size. So go ahead and take a pinch off once you get your clay. You're going to need that for some extra parts. All right, making my clay ball, moving it back and forth, hand to hand. If you have any rings on or things like that, or anything special today, don't worry, we'll wear aprons, but you might want to take off any jewelry because this clay is very messy. It's like playing in the mud or the dirt. All right, so I'm moving my clay back and forth. I'm putting some pressure on it from my hand to hand. This is called wedging the clay. You hear that slapping out because you're getting the air out of it. So I'm wedging it back and forth. Sometimes you can even hit it on the table, but when you're hitting on the table, I know our tables sometimes move and jiggle, so be careful because you might mess up what somebody at your table team's doing. But I can wedge out the air by throwing it down on the table gently, not very hard. If you want to throw it hard, move it back and forth from your hands. Once I think I got all of those air bubbles out and it's working into a sphere, which is like a circle but 3D, so I'm going to keep working into a sphere. You can do that by starting to roll a ball in your hands. Once it's into a sphere, it doesn't have to be perfect, but once it's into a pretty good sized ball, then what I'm going to do is take my thumb. Give me a thumbs up, and you can do this with me. Thumbs up, and you dive that thumb in. Dive that thumb into the clay. Now, make sure you're holding the other part of your clay in your hand, not on the table. There's a reason for that. So if you need to borrow a nice strong thumb, I'll blend you my thumb today to make that hole in the middle. But most of us should be able to dive that thumb in right in the middle of that clay, almost all the way down, but not quite through, because you don't want to poke a hole. Then pull it out, and this is what I call my baby gator, or maybe crab pinchers, but I call it my baby gator because it chomps down on the sides of the clay. So what I do is put my baby gator in, which is my thumb in the hole, and the two on the sides, and I pinch and turn. Pinch, open, turn. Pinch, open, turn. Pinch, open, turn. And I keep doing that all the way around until it starts to become a little pot. That's why it's called a pinch pot, because you're pinching and turning. Now, don't go too crazy with the pinching and turning because you want to make sure that you do the pinky test. The pinky test is when you check to see if the wall of your clay bowl or your pinch pot is as thick as your pinky. If it's thinner than your pinky, you need to stop. And there's other ways you might need to repair it. Say if you pinch a wall too thin by accident, oops, I forgot to do the pinky test. Well, what could happen if you pinch that wall too thin is you might get a hole. That's okay if that happens. The nice part about clay is that you can start over, but the more you start over from scratch with that sphere, you're going to get more air bubbles trapped in there and the clay will dry out. So it's really best if you do it the first time and just take your time. But if you do break a wall and pinch it too thin on accident, you can fold it over, and smooth it out and kind of start again so you can make that wall stronger again. And I'm going to do that just to show you because I know that will happen to some of you today, and that's absolutely okay. Doesn't have to be perfect. Today's our first day working with clay. All right, so once I do the pinky test and the walls are as thick as my pinky, I check the bottom. And this is something I'm going to come around and do too, because you might have a lot of clay hiding at that bottom of your pinch pot. You don't want the clay hiding down there because otherwise it's just a waste. It's going to make it really heavy. So I'm going to go ahead and put both my thumbs in, kind of make sure that it's not too thick down there, but also not too thin that it punches a hole in my clay. All right, so now I'm working on smoothing things out. So I'm just smoothing things out with my fingers just so I don't have any cracks in the clay. Because once it gets fired in the kiln, those cracks will only start to expand and you could actually have your clay cracked. Do is kind of press down on the bottom. What's going to do what we were doing with when we were pressing down with our thumbs was giving it a flat bottom so it can stand up. Just like that. I know it's hard to see from that angle. But your pinch pot should be pretty wide, not so wide that it's a plate, right? It's still a pot. And what we're going to be doing with these is actually growing something in them, which is super exciting. So you need to make sure we have room to plant the thing that we're going to grow. That's a hint to what we'll be doing eventually. But right now we're just worried about making that pinch pot, kind of getting the sides even, looking around the edges, maybe turn it over. And over and your hands were absorbing some of that moisture, you might want to give it just one spray of water. Just one, that's it. And then it makes it easier to smooth out some of those cracks. All right, once it gets smoothed out, I'm going to pick my best side of it. I'm going to look for the very best side that I think I'm the happiest with. Once I pick that best side, I am going to actually make this into a face. And when I do that, I'm going to start with my eyes. To start with eyes, I'm going to press my thumbs in gently here, just to make room for the eyes. Then I'm going to pinch a nose right there. So what I'm doing is I pressed in my eyes with my thumbs gently, because you don't want to rip a hole in the pot. Press in gently with your thumbs. And then I'm smoothing out a nose. And what I'm going to do to make my nose even more defined is press in underneath it. So there's two areas you press, your thumbs and then under that nose. And you kind of start forming a nose there. And then I'm going to have room for a mouth. So this is going to be a little portrait. It does not have to be of you. It could be a crazy little silly monster. It could be a pet. It could be whatever you want it to. It could be a self-portrait. It could be you. It could be your mom. It could just be some random person. I'm just putting the clay like this to show you, but what's going to happen if you actually turn it on your table like this is it's going to flatten out. So whenever you're working with it, you kind of want to hold it in your hand like this gently, because this clay can break very easily and you wouldn't want to ruin all your hard work. So remember when I told you to pinch off some of that extra clay? Well, that was because we are going to use it to make some facial features. So I'm going to take a little pinch of clay, roll it into a sphere like I did before, and I'm going to make an eyeball. Now, when I'm making an eyeball, I'm going to press it down a little bit, maybe shape it so I have my eye how I want it. And I'll do it again. It's a nice part about clay. All right, now when I want something to stick to the clay, I gotta do something with one of my clay tools. I'm gonna get a toothpick for this clay tool. This is called scoring something. When you score something, it's to make it stick to another piece of clay. What I'm gonna do is basically make a clay Velcro by going back and forth, maybe drawing some X's and making a texture on that little bit of clay. What I'm gonna do is put the texture in the same place that I want that eyeball to go, or whatever part, the lips, whatever I'm putting onto my face. I'm going to just go ahead and make a scratchy texture there. That's going to become like Velcro to make it stick. But the magic is you need some water. Just a little squirt, just one on there, and then you stick it down. Now you are going to have to press firmly, but be careful that you're not pressing a hole through your clay. So always support it behind it as well. All right, so maybe I'll press those eyeballs down, smooth them out, because what's gonna happen is even if it sticks now, what's gonna happen when the clay dries out is some of those parts might fall off or break off in the kiln if you don't stick them well enough. So you really wanna make sure you're doing that slip and score. The slip is when you spray it with water, the scoring is when you make the textured Velcro with your toothpick, and then smooth it on really, really well. That's gonna make sure that no pieces fall off for you. another thing you could do is you don't even have to add them as separate parts. What you could do instead is you could actually just draw on using one of your clay tools. You could draw right onto the clay and draw some eyes. But I would suggest using a nose that's actually 3D and formed out of that clay, just to give it a really cool effect there. Because when we start planting in these, it's going to look like something, which is kind of funny, and I'll make sure that you guys see that before we do it. But for now, we're just focused on the pinch pot and shaping and forming some of those things once we get done. Now, if you don't get to this part today, that's okay. Do not worry. The main important part is that you finish making that pinch pot. Now, maybe I'll go back with my clay tool, add some details. And then maybe I'll add some lips. And what I can do for lips is roll a little coil. That's like a clay snake if you guys have ever made that with Play-Doh, maybe testing out how I want my mouth. Remember to slip and score, so making that clay Velcro again. I could also draw my mouth on, so that's a good idea too. This guy's looking a little creepy. You could make any kind of, you can make a tongue sticking out, you can make smiling, you can make teeth, you could make whatever kind of face you want. Just make sure that whatever you do, it's stuck on there well enough. You can use your tools to kind of carve and shape things. Maybe put some lines in there. Maybe I'll add some eyebrows. Maybe I would use my extra clay to add something else on there. But for today, I'm gonna say that's good enough. That's what I'm gonna get to today. If you run out of time, don't worry. We can have some extra time to work on these next week. But when you finish, it's important that you make sure that all the cracks are smoothed out, that you don't have any holes, that your pieces are stuck on well enough, and then you bring your piece carefully up, because remember, it's very fragile right now. You bring it up to the clay cart. On the clay cart, there will be a poster with your name on it. You place yours carefully on top of your name. Once you do that, you can go wash your hands, clean up, put your tools back in the bin, make sure any extra clay gets brought up to the clay cart and put in that bin. I actually will have a bag or a bin for extra clay. Please do not pocket any clay. The reason is it's just going to crumble up and turn to dirt, and right now, if I have this extra pieces, I could gather that all from all of you and have enough to make an extra pinch pot. This clay is expensive, so I do not want to hear about any of it going home in any pockets, all right? All right, artists, have fun today making your little pinch pot faces.